What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the newest episode of the Believe in Oregon podcast. My name's Zachary Neal, here to break down a 34-14 win for the Oregon Ducks over the Northwestern Wildcats. I think there's a good amount of things to talk about. That was, it's a road win in the Big Ten. You are never going to complain about that. You're always happy when you can get one of those. For all being honest, I think we can say it was not the prettiest of games. I think they left a lot to be desired from that game. It was a bit ugly. It was a slow start. I know there was a lot of factors into, why that happened or things that went into that. Early start, 9 a.m. kickoff. I'm sure a lot of fans were not as prepared as the players were for that. I think that the players did just fine. I don't think that was a big deal for them. 12,000 foot or 12,000 person stadium, like a very small. I still just could not get used to watching what looked like a high school football game the entire time. That threw me off from start to finish. It was just weird. It was strange. I think going into that game with that sort of newness to it is always going to be different. So when you can leave that with a win, no major injuries, a comfortable win. I know they didn't cover the spread because of a couple of late scores. Not a big deal if you bet on them, big deal. But I stayed away from this one. But a win's a win. You take it whenever you can get it. I think there actually is a bit of a positive in the way that this went. I mean, we can be honest. This was a C minus game from Oregon. They did not play their best. The defense was solid. I mean, they held them scoreless through three quarters. The run defense, I don't think was that impressive. The final numbers are a little bit skewed. I think they allowed 179 rushing yards. Of course, they allowed a 79-yard touchdown on the ground in the fourth quarter, which skews the stats a little bit. So I think the stats look a little bit better on the ground than, what we saw with our eyes. Just watching that, they got pushed around up front a little bit. They were able to get off the field a few times. They got a couple of interceptions, a couple of turnovers, which you love to see. But overall, this was not the same defense that we saw against Montana State and Oklahoma State. And yes, that's Montana State and Oklahoma State, but Northwestern also is, all due respect, I don't think that great either. So I would have expected going into this game that we'd see something along the lines of those dominant performances. And, looking at the stats, looking at the score, it's kind of hard to marry those two things because the box score says one thing and it shows that Northwestern, how many total yards did they have in this game? They had 313 total yards. That's more than I thought they did. 178 rushing yards, 135 through the air. They did okay on offense. Oregon's defense, I think could have done a lot better than they did. I would have expected them to do a lot better. But again, I think there's a positive take from this because if you can go in and play a C or C minus game, leave with a 20-point victory and leave feeling kind of gross about it, I would say, just kind of like you didn't do what you're supposed to do. I don't think they upheld the standard, as Lanning would say. And he even said after the game, he said that on the Fox broadcast, he had a sour taste in his mouth for the way things ended. To give up 14 points in the fourth quarter, I think is, that's far below the standard, especially when the starters went out there and pitched a shutout through three quarters. So I think there's a lot to improve. The pass defense was solid. Run defense can get a little bit better because in 2 weeks, I don't think Oregon State's going to test you much this week, but 2 weeks you got Penn State. And they've got some really, really good backs. We saw what they did to Oregon in the Big Ten championship game last year. And I think that's, after the first 2 weeks, I wouldn't say I didn't have questions about Oregon's run defense. I was less concerned than I was going into the year, but this kind of made it look like, Montana State and Oklahoma State may not be as good as we thought they were. And I don't think we thought they were very good in the first place, but Northwestern was without Cam Porter, their starting running back, and they still managed to do pretty well on the ground. But regardless, I thought that it's, you kind of like getting ugly games out of the way. I think that's how we felt last year. I know that's how we felt last year after the first two games with Idaho and Boise State, that Oregon didn't play well. They got tested and they came out unscathed. I think you learned a lot in those wins. I think Oregon's going to learn a lot from this game in particular. I think that's a good thing. And when you can, again, play a bad game and still win by 20, I think that's really solid. It was interesting. I mean, it was apparent right from the get-go that this was, we knew going into this game that Oregon was going to need to, as they say, create their own juice. Several players have said that, fire starter was their theme of the week, and they needed it early. They didn't get it on their first drive. They punted on the first drive after getting a quick first down and then, stalling out after that. The defense, I thought, they didn't impress me that much on the first drive. I know Bryce Betcher ended it with an interception, but Northwestern moved the ball a little bit. They were starting to drive a little bit. I don't know how many plays was in that drive, but I think you don't want to say they got bailed out by the interception because it was a great play. I mean, he made the interception, he stopped the drive, but I was not too impressed by the defense before that. But overall, I was impressed by the defense. I think they did really well stopping the pass, getting turnovers. They did decently against the run. But it was just another instance where, I compared this to a Stanford game because it was the exact same way. And you knew this going into the game. We've seen those games against Stanford where you go down there and you struggle for a quarter because it's just, there's no energy in this game. There's barely any crowd, 12,000 people. You've got commercials that are stopping the game every 2 minutes, seemed like every other play. So there was a lot of reasons for, any team to struggle to get up and going. And I think Oregon felt that. I don't know that if you would call that adversity. I don't think they really got tested too much in this game. They will definitely be tested more in the future, but I liked what I saw so far. I thought there was reasons to be encouraged after this game. And I like the fact that they have a lot of things to work on. Because going into, not to overlook Oregon State, but going into Penn State, I don't want this team feeling high and mighty, like they can't lose or can't be stopped. I want them to think they can get better. And we know that Dan Lanning is going to have them feeling that way going into the game. He's good at motivating this team and keeping them level-headed and humble, I think, so far. One interesting thing, Dante Moore had a really good game, 16 for 20 for 178 yards and a touchdown. Did throw his first interception of the season, his first interception as a Duck, actually. I don't think he would take that throw back if he could. He threw it against cover two safeties, too high shell. The middle linebacker just kind of dropped deep and undercut his route. A deep ball to Jacorian Moore. He said that throwing that way on the field, the ball just like the air kind of got under a little bit and allowed it to float, allowed that linebacker to get back there. Other than that, though, he played a very clean game. He had some throws in this game where if you haven't seen them, go on Twitter and find the clips because, man, he has such a good arm, and his ability to just kind of step up in the pocket when needed to or roll out, create a new pocket for himself, and then just fire passes. I mean, he had a couple of long third down conversions. His touchdown to Kenyon Sadiq over the seam past the tight end in single coverage. That was impressive, just a ball on a rope to Kenyon. I was just really impressed. I mean, it was a very clean game from him outside of that one pass where, I think the elements just kind of got a little bit, you don't like an interception, but I don't think it was that bad. Another game where he didn't put the ball in jeopardy that much outside of that one pass. He used his legs a little bit. He got his helmet knocked off on one play, which he seemed okay from. He got up and looked a little bit, not woozy, but just like, oh, that hurt. Got up, he's fine, came back in, threw the touchdown. So I thought another really good game from Dante Moore. I'm curious to see what his Heisman odds look like on FanDuel after this game. Because as I'm watching right now, Arch Manning is not doing too well, and I think he'd already surpassed him. And before the game, I was looking, and Dante was at plus 1,000 on FanDuel, which was the third highest in the nation. So I think as Oregon continues to win, and I think they will continue to win, and at least until that Penn State game. And I'll talk about it with Jay Stu more on Monday or Tuesday. That I feel better and better every day about that Penn State game. I think that's a game that they can absolutely win. Just because Penn State, I think, what are they right now? Last I saw, they were up 24-0. So, but I think they're playing Villanova, like a team they should beat handily. I'm just not that impressed by Penn State, but we'll talk about that later. If Oregon continues to win, Dante Moore is going to be there in that Heisman conversation. And I think it's warranted. I think he's showing everything we need to see on the field from him. He's really looking very good. And today was absolutely one of those games. One interesting stat from this, Oregon had 0 penalties called on them in this game. That's the first time. Shout out to the Fox broadcast for getting this stat. First time since 2000, the 2000 season that has happened. That's just, last week, I think they had 5 pre-snap penalties called on them in Autzen. Loud environment, but that's your home environment. You should not be having those penalties. They clearly drilled that. They had a big focus on that. Lanning said afterwards they emphasized that a lot this past week, and it showed up. And it's one thing, you go into a small stadium on the road without much crowd noise. Like, yeah, you're probably not going to have too much, pre-snap penalties, too much of an emphasis on that from the crowd. But then when you rotate as many guys as you do, and Oregon got as many young guys and backups in as they did in this game, to still uphold that standard and not have any penalties, I think is very impressive. So that was really good to see from them. Also, just to highlight some guys that really stood out to me, I wrote that, at this point, 3 games, we've got a good sample size of guys who are impressing that weren't really household names going into the year. Like, obviously, we knew that Dante and Kenyon and Mateo and Amari Washington were going to impress at this point in the season. But guys who we were not talking about, who we are talking about now, I've got Jerry Mixon, I've got D.R. Hill, I've got Jordan Davison, I've got Cooper Perry. 3 of those guys are true freshmen, which is really impressive. But Jerry Mixon, I think, has been, one of the MVPs of the defense so far. He had another really good game today. He had 5 tackles. He had another interception. It's fun to see, whenever players or coaches talk about Jerry and his coverage, they're like, yeah, he's getting interceptions every day in practice. We're not shocked to see this at all. So it sounds like he is just, he's killing it in practice. We're seeing that in games. He's got one of the highest coverage grades of any linebacker in the nation on PFF, one of the top graded linebackers of anyone in the nation on PFF. And it's these type of breakout players that I think are so important to the team and so encouraging for fans to see, just because of the confidence it gives you in the coaching staff. I talked about it a lot with Jay Stu earlier this year, that Dan Lanning, put himself out there after the spring game. Was like, no, I'm not bringing in any more linebackers. I love the guys that we've got. Great. I love that. That puts, that shows that he's going to bat for his players. The linebackers had to step up and prove that he was right for that. So far they have. And Jerry Mixon is one of those guys that's absolutely answered the bell. He's answered the call and shown up and been a really good player. Devin Jackson, I think he's still dealing with an injury. I know he was preseason a little bit. From what I've seen out there, and I need to look at the tape from this game a little bit more, but Jerry Mixon looks like, the better starter right now. And Jackson may not be 100% still. I don't know, but Jerry has looked really, really good. Devin's still a great player. Both of them playing alongside Bryce. The linebacking core looks great, and that's even playing without guys like Dylan Williams and Braden Platt. Both of them were still out for this game. But that room, I think, had a lot of questions going into the season. So far, they've looked great. I think that Lanning is, up to this point, been proven right in saying, I like the guys we've got there. We don't need to go anywhere in the portal. D.R. Hill, we've been calling for it for a while, that we want to see him just with more opportunity to just break out and give us one of those runs that we've been told about, out of practice, that he's just breaking all the time. He did that today. He had a 66-yard touchdown run. He led the team with 94 yards on 5 carries with 1 touchdown, averaged 18.8 yards per carry. This is a guy that it's like Kenyon last year. We're waiting to see it. There's all the stories. We've seen flashes of what he can do. He did it this game. I thought he looked really good. Notable that, Noah Whittington did not play in this game. He was listed as questionable in the injury report. I think he got dinged up a little bit in practice. I'm sure if this was an important game, he probably could have played in it, but we'll see. We'll hear more from Lanning on that on Monday night. But Diers looked really good. I'm impressed with him. I'm also impressed with Jordan Davison, who once again got in the end zone, 5 touchdowns in 3 games for the true freshman. He's just that goal line back that they can go to whenever they need to. and he's just going to punch it in. Cooper Perry, I thought looked really good again. Let me see his stats. I'm sure he didn't have much. Sorry, where are the passing totals? 2 catches for 7 yards, but they're still going to him in some like important spots. Third down, they need a conversion. They're going to Perry, a short little out route, crossing route, whatever it may be. I just like the fact that they're scheming plays for him as a true freshman. That's important. We didn't see them do that for guys like, off the top of my head, Justice Lowe, Jurion Dickey, Kyler Casper. Like when they were true freshmen, they were not getting snaps and having plays called, having their number called. So far, we're seeing that with Cooper. It just tells me that they see a lot more than we're currently seeing, and it just gives me hope for what he's going to be eventually. So I've been really impressed with what I've seen from him. I hope we continue to see more because he seems like a really good player. Based on what all the other players say about him, he's a special talent. I'm excited to see what he has to say. Overall, I don't have much more to go over. It was a relatively boring game. I don't think that's always a bad thing. 69-3 wins are fun. I don't think, you always learn stuff in wins and losses, hopefully we aren't talking about losses as much as wins, but you learn things in blowout wins. But I think you learned a little bit more today in a win like a 34-14 because there are so many things you need to clean up. Going into a game like Oregon State and Penn State, I think that Oregon needed a win like this because I think after last week they were probably feeling really good, rightfully so. They looked really good. They were getting all the national attention, national headlines. I've said before I don't like the national attention, the national headlines. The number of times I saw people saying, Oregon could win it all this year. This last week, it's like, just stop talking about it. I don't want to go down that road yet. I want a few more weeks of no pressure. And then after the Penn State game, let's talk. We'll see where we are then. But right now, just keep ignoring Oregon. I think that would be best. It will be interesting to see what happens this next week. I know there's going to be some fun announcements before the game. I'll say that much. I'm excited to see how they look next week, what they're wearing. Should be a fun uniform matchup, and the Civil War is always fun. So I'm excited for that. I think it'll be a good game. I'm excited to see where this team continues to improve. And how they look a week from now. That should be a fun time to see them back at Autzen, and then after that, go on the road to Penn State, and that's it's the biggest regular season game of the week for sure. And I think that one's going to be a lot of fun too. So, thank you guys for tuning into this live stream. I appreciate it. Once again, I'll be back next week. Well, in a couple days with Jay Stu. I think we're going to record on Monday. And we'll go from there. We'll look ahead to the Oregon State matchup from there. So looking forward to that. You can check out more of my work, DucksWired at usatoday.com. Follow me at Zachary C. Neal on Twitter. Again, I will be back on early this week with Jay Stu, and we'll break down everything and look ahead to next week. Until then, take it easy.